great presentation. I always enjoy hearing from other industry colleagues. I think we're all anxious and excited to be so fortunate to work with the Stargardt community, with advocacy organizations such as Stargardt's Connected. And this is definitely a situation where, a rising tide lifts all boats, and it's fantastic that, so many companies are doing really great things in terms of research for Stargardt disease. So I always like hearing from others because I always learn something new. So thank you, Claudia. All right. Bhavna, okay to view? Can you see what I'm sharing?
Yep, I can see it clearly.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Bhavna, for the lovely introduction. As she said, my name is Paula Pearson, and I'm the head of medical affairs at Alkeus Pharmaceuticals. Um, and here at Alkeus, we are harnessing breakthrough science to transform care for retinal diseases. Alkeus is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying that we have an investigational product in clinical trials. And we are located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States. We are dedicated to preserving the sight of individuals impacted by retinal disease. The company was founded about 15 years ago, and at the time, our co-founder received a grant from the National Eye Institute at the National Institutes of Health, and he began some small clinical trials with that funding. A little over 2 years ago, the company just had a few employees, less than five. But over the past couple of years, the company is now growing, and we now have a team with deep experience in both small and large pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. We have experience in rare disease and in ophthalmology, particularly in diseases affecting the retina. Prior to joining Alkeus, I was at Alkeus Pharmaceuticals for about 5 years, where we launched the first product for geographic atrophy, which is an age-related form of macular degeneration. So the retina and the community is near and dear to my heart as well. Alkeus is also incredibly fortunate to have some investment backing from some pretty impressive investors who have significant experience in helping companies our size bring a product to market. We're still very small, but small but mighty. As Claudio talked a bit about Stargardt disease, I'll probably highlight some of the same things that he did as well. But Stargardt is a rare disease with high unmet medical need. At Alkeus, we have done phase 2 studies in Stargardt disease as well as in geographic atrophy. But our initial focus is in Stargardt disease, and that is where our priority lies right now. As I know Claudio mentioned, the estimated incidence in the US is 1 in 8 to 10,000, and the estimated global prevalence is 810,000 to 1 million people affected. As he also mentioned, there are no treatment options today. Our product is called gildaretinol, and gildaretinol is a new molecular entity, and it's an oral treatment. It's once daily, and it reduces the toxic dimer formation that happens in the retina without negatively impacting the visual cycle. Gildaretinol is, when we say systemically metabolized just within your body, it's metabolized similarly to vitamin A. We have received some special designations in the US and in Europe. We have received breakthrough therapy designation in the US, and this is a process that is created by the FDA to speed up the development and review of drugs that treat serious conditions and that show significant improvements over existing treatments. We also have orphan drug designation in the United States. That means this designation is given when you have a condition that affects fewer than 200,000 people, or in the EU, not more than 5 in 10,000 people. We also have rare pediatric disease designation, as well as orphan medical product designation in the EU. And again, that's just a status that's granted to drugs intended to treat, prevent, or diagnose rare diseases. And as I mentioned before, you must affect no more than 5 in 10,000 people. I must mention gildaretinol is investigational and has not been approved in the US or in any other jurisdiction. Okay, so Stargardt, as Claudia mentioned as well, is the most common inherited form of juvenile macular dystrophy. 95% of cases are due to pathogenic variants in ABCA4, so disease causing changes in the ABCA4 gene. And by having these variants, these pathogenic variants, this leads to accumulation of vitamin A dimers, which results in retinal cell death. As you can see from Claudio's presentation, as well as other research that's going on, there is a lot of innovation going on in Stargardt disease, and we are all, acutely aware of the need for this community. Okay, so on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see a depiction of the retina and the retinal pigment epithelium. As I mentioned, if you have a defective ABCA4 gene, vitamin A cannot get transported out of the retina appropriately. And vitamin A is required for a healthy visual cycle. As I mentioned, 95% of Stargardt disease is caused by a malfunctioning transport of vitamin A via this gene. And these disease-causing variants, again, make it next to very difficult for vitamin A to get out of the retina, impairs transport. And as vitamin A accumulates, it begins to clump together and cause something called dimers. And when these dimers form, they stick together and create something called lipofuscin. When you have lipofuscin buildup, you have inflammation, you have oxidative stress on the retina, and ultimately the cells of the retinal pigment epithelium and the photoreceptors die and cause atrophy. Our investigational therapy, gildaretinol, was designed to specifically address the issue of vitamin A dimerization. So this is in vitro data, so data from a lab. Gildaretinol is metabolized in the body as though it were natural vitamin A, but in the retina, it dimerizes much less. What the product is a modified form of vitamin A. So at the carbon 20 position on vitamin A, it has been chemically modified so that you put a massive atom of deuterium on it, which is much larger than hydrogen, and it keeps the vitamin A molecules from clumping together, so it inhibits that dimerization. The graph here on the left, the horizontal axis shows time in hours, and the vertical axis shows the concentration or amount of vitamin A dimers. And the orange line that you see there is depicting that the rate of dimer formation is 4 to 5 times less with gildaretinol present. As I mentioned, gildaretinol is a new molecular entity. The mechanism of action is not dependent on the different pathogenic variants, and it does not modulate the visual cycle. Gildaretinol is being studied across the spectrum of Stargardt disease. On the left, you see there a healthy retina where the fovea is dark in the center and it maintains a uniform graduation to a lighter gray. And then you can see the different stages and progression of Stargardt disease on the right, from early to moderate to advanced. We are conducting a comprehensive clinical program, which covers all stages of Stargardt disease. And we have studied gildaretinol in geographic atrophy secondary to AMD. Of course, I do again want to highlight that gildaretinol is not approved in the US or in any jurisdiction. Therefore, efficacy and safety, we can make no claims that those have been established. The totality of the data that we have generated across all stages of disease does show the potential to slow the progression of Stargardt disease with a consistent and favorable safety profile demonstrated to date. I'm going to click through these quickly so I can get to there we go. Usually clinical trials have an acronym of some sort, as Claudio had mentioned theirs. The acronym for our Stargardt disease study is called TEASE, T-E-A-S-E, and there are 4 separate studies under the TEASE umbrella. The TEASE 1 study is complete. It studied 50 patients with advanced Stargardt disease defined by well-delineated retinal pigment epithelium atrophy. TEASE 2 is also complete and studied 80 patients with moderate disease, and that was defined by decreased retinal sensitivity on microperimetry, and they did not have well-delineated RPE atrophy. TEASE 3 is an ongoing study. It's a fairly difficult study to enroll for. Our goal is to have 20 patients. We have, I believe, 8 patients enrolled right now. But these patients have very early disease and are asymptomatic. The original patients in TEASE 3 were identified based on having a sibling who had further progressed Stargardt disease, and then genetic testing was done on the younger sibling, and they were determined to have the ABCA4 pathogenic variants. And in that study, you can see consistent maintenance of BCVA over time. And in TEASE 3, we do have some folks who have been on treatment for 7 years or longer. And TEASE 4 is ongoing, and it has a mix of patients from TEASE 1, 2, and 3, plus some new patients that were enrolled being treatment naive. This was designed as an open label 24-month extension safety study. And as I mentioned, the retinal phenotype does vary there, but there are patients from all 3 of the previous studies rolled into TEASE 4. And we look forward to sharing data on those over the coming year. In terms of efficacy that has been observed in the clinical trials, in the TEASE 1 study, so the study where we're looking at advanced Stargardt disease, gildaretinol significantly slowed the growth rate of atrophic lesions from months 6 to 24 compared to placebo. In TEASE 2, this was a smaller study, and the endpoint there was looking at the rate of ellipsoid zone area loss in the retina. It didn't meet its primary endpoint, but it did demonstrate a trend in slowing that rate of loss from month 6 to 24 compared to placebo. And in the interim TEASE 3 analysis with 5 patients, so I mentioned we have 8 patients enrolled, but 5 patients have completed at least 2 years, and their BCVA scores all remained relatively stable over the course of treatment. When you think about safety, you know that safety is definitely paramount and always of interest, and it should be. Most adverse events, or AEs, were mild to moderate. And in placebo-controlled studies, adverse events were very similar between the treatment arms. We had no reports of chromatopsia, dark adaptation delays, or night blindness. That goes back to the fact that gildaretinol does not modulate the visual cycle. And there were no clinically significant changes in liver function tests or other laboratory assessments. There was one adverse event of papilledema, which is an optic disc condition results, but it was in a patient that was on 24 milligrams of gildaretinol. That was in TEASE 1 originally, there was a 14 milligram arm and a 24 milligram arm. The 24 milligram was discontinued because the efficacy between the two was very similar, but you always want to try to do the lowest minimum dose that you can get efficacy on. And the patient was able to switch to 14 milligrams of gildaretinol and then completed the study without any recurrence. And then an SAE, serious adverse event, no serious adverse events related to study drug were observed in the TEASE program in Stargardt disease. We are currently planning for a global phase 3 study of gildaretinol in Stargardt disease. I do not have further details to share at this point, but definitely over the coming months, we should have more information to share. We'll make sure that Bhavna and the team at Stargardt's Connected receives that information, and you can always find information on the studies at clinicaltrials.gov. Sam, look, you made our slide. At Alkeus, like I said, we're definitely dedicated to preserving the sight of patients with retinal disease. You see our patient advocacy email there. That comes directly to me. Additionally, I can drop into the chat a couple of other resources that we have developed. There is a website called Your North Starg, STARG.com, that provides resources and education, as well as links out to the different patient advocacy organizations. And then over the last couple of years, in 2024 and 2025, we sponsored a program called the Stargardt Summit, and that was in conjunction with the Carroll Center for the Blind here in Boston. And you can find those videos online on YouTube, and you can learn a lot more about ongoing research. We have other IRD specialists that are focused there, as well as just some great resources for patients. And I can drop those in the chat, Bobna, if you like.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that brilliant presentation. Should we go to the chat now?